It is now my great pleasure to introduce to you our visiting minister. She is doing a pulpit exchange with Reverend Kate this morning. Reverend Kate is in Barnstable. And right here with us is the Reverend Dr. Kristen L. Harper, who has served the Unitarian Church of Barnstable Unitarian-Universalist since 2002. Dr. Harper went to seminary at Meadville Lombard Theological School in Chicago and served churches in Michigan and Florida prior to being settled in Barnstable. She is married. Her husband, Jay, is here with us today and lives with 4 cats, and her husband in Marston Mills. Reverend Dr. Kristen Harper.
Thank you. My opening words are by Gloria Wade Gales, a professor at Spelman College and civil rights activist. They witness for the Spirit without defining it. I doubt anyone can, because the Spirit or spirituality defies definition, a fact that speaks to its power as much as it reflects its mystery. Like the wind, it's surely there, and yet like the wind, it cannot be seen, and we bear witness to its presence and its power. We cannot hold it in our hands and put it on a scale, but we feel the weight, the force of its influence in our lives. We cannot hear it, but we hear ourselves singing and speaking and testifying because it moves, inspires, and directs us to do so. I invite you to rise in body or spirit and join me in our opening hymn, number 163, For the Earth Forever Turning. The first reading this morning is a poem called The Courage That My Mother Had by Edna St. Vincent Millay. The courage that my mother had went with her and is with her still. Rock from New England quarried, now granite in a granite hill. The golden brooch my mother wore, she left behind for me to wear. I have no thing I treasure more, yet it is something I could spare. Oh, if instead she left me the thing she took into the grave, that courage like a rock, which she has no more need of, and I have. The second reading is an excerpt from I See the Promised Land by the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He's speaking in front of striking sanitation workers at the national headquarters of the Church of God in Christ and said, "Well, I don't know what will happen now. We have some difficult days ahead. But it doesn't matter for me now, because I've been to the mountaintop, and I don't mind. Like anybody, I would have loved to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go to the mountaintop. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you. But I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. And I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. A woman, tired after a long day at work, headed for a favorite coffee shop. On her way, she stopped by a newsstand for a copy of the New York Times and then by a bakery for a small bag of cookies. She looked forward to enjoying a good cup of coffee and reading her paper. The coffee shop turned out to be crowded, and so she had to share a table with a man who, thank goodness, was also reading his paper. The waiter brought her coffee, and she sat back and began to relax. From behind the newspaper, she reached into a bag of cookies on the table and took one. The man at the table did the same, took one of the cookies. She lowered her paper and glared at him. He seemed not to notice. A few minutes later, she reached for another cookie. Then, astonishingly, the man also reached for another cookie. She couldn't believe it. There was only one cookie left in the bag. She moved to take it, but the man got there first. Speechless with rage, she stared at him. He lowered his paper and smiled, broke the cookie in two, and offered her half. Well, she folded her paper, grabbed her coat, left money for her coffee, and stomped out of the coffee house. She couldn't believe it. The nerve of some people. What is the city coming to? Fuming, she walked down the subway, rummaging in her bag for car fare. And what did her hand come upon? Unopened and untouched, her bag of cookies. If we share what we have, we will always find we have enough. The morning offertory will now be collected. Whenever I hear those words, I may not get there with you. A chill goes down my spine. The very next day, as Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. stood on the balcony of his Memphis hotel room, a single shot took his life. I can't imagine what it's like to know that his life was in danger, to know and to acknowledge that what he was doing, his life's work, his consecration, if you will, might lead to his death. What courage it must have taken. What faith. I'm not sure if I'm that courageous. I don't know if I could stand in front of a room urging a crowd to stay the course, wondering if this would be my last hour, my last sermon. Like Edna St. Vincent Millay, I sometimes find myself bereft of courage. You see, I've always wanted to be courageous, to be the one who would shelter Jews during the Holocaust, to be the one to register to vote during segregation in the South, to run into a burning building and save a child. I've always wondered if I could be like Harriet Tubman, leading slaves to freedom, using my body to shelter others. I confess that I am not myself a brave person. I'm afraid of roaches and rats and anything that could get stuck in my hair. One morning, I woke up to find my 3 kittens all growling at something high on the wall near our staircase. It looked like a big, hairy spider. My cats were unafraid, their tails swishing back and forth, their bottoms wiggling as they prepared to pounce. I, of course, was terrified. It looked like a big, hairy tarantula. I quickly put on my glasses and saw that it wasn't a spider at all, but a baby bat, which changed nothing. I woke up my partner Jay, who told me to ignore it and he would deal with it later. But I screeched, "I can't ignore it! It's blocking my way to the stairs! What if it attacked me? I could get rabies!" I made him get up and move it. Jay would probably add that while he was trying to capture the poor little bat, I reprimanded him from the safety of our bedroom for accidentally pinning one of its wings. And that after he threw the bat outside, I stood on the porch for 5 minutes to make sure that it was all right. I may not be the bravest person, but it doesn't mean I don't have compassion. So I'm not a brave person, but I want to believe I would be a courageous person. I don't think courage and bravery are the same. Bravery involves some kind of fearlessness, a willing and sometimes an eagerness to face danger. Firemen are brave, rushing into burning buildings, trying to save life and property. Policemen are brave, driving into drug and gun-infested areas, trying to keep citizens safe. Military men and women are brave. Extreme sports athletes are brave, jumping off cliffs with nylon wings or little parachutes. Courage, on the other hand, has less to do with fear and more to do with something deeper, inward. It has a soul dimension. According to the Oxford English Dictionary, courage comes from the French word coeur, which means heart. To have courage is to have heart. Courage is the heart as the seat of the feelings. Or as it's further explained, courage means to bring a thing into good heart. To bring a thing into good heart. I love that idea. The idea that something can be out of line with our hearts, and it takes courage to bring it back in line. During the civil rights struggle, a young Unitarian-Universalist housewife from Detroit saw what was happening in the South, and it didn't sit well with her heart. Viola Luiso left her home in Michigan and went to Selma, Alabama, to drive black people to work and to register to vote. She was shot and killed by Klansmen while transporting civil rights worker Leroy Martin. She gave her life to bring things in line with her heart. Courage also entails being honest and truthful, being sincere with oneself, being authentic. Audre Lorde, an author and black lesbian feminist, put it this way: I have come to believe over and over again that what is most important to me must be spoken, made verbal, shared, even at the risk of having it bruised or misunderstood. And I remind myself all the time now that if I were to have been born mute or maintain an oath of silence my whole life long for safety, I would still have suffered. I would still die. We can sit in our corners mute as bottles forever while our sisters and brothers and ourselves are wasted, while our children are distorted and destroyed, while our earth is poisoned. We can sit safe in our corners mute as bottles and we still be no more or less afraid. I was going to die, if not sooner than later. Whether or not I had ever spoken myself, my silence has not protected me. Your silence will not protect you. May we find our voice. Finding our voice, speaking your truth takes courage. It took courage for Sojourner Truth to stand in front of a crowd of white men and say, "Ain't I a woman?" It took courage for Bayard Rustin, a black Unitarian, to stand in front of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and say, "Yes, I am gay, but what does that have to do with my ability to help the civil rights movement?" It takes courage for abused women to raising children to stand and say, "No more." It takes courage to stand up and tell others how you feel, who you are, and what you believe. The third definition of courage in the Oxford English Dictionary is spirit, liveliness, vital force or energy. Isn't that wonderful? Vital force, energy. The word courage has evolved to mean one's life force, that which propels life. Martin Luther King Jr.'s life was propelled by courage. Now, when I was in seminary, I read Ava Fogelman's Conscience and Courage, Rescuers of Jews During the Holocaust. Fogelman, a psychologist who treated Holocaust survivors, tells the stories of courageous men and women and children and communities who came to the aid of Jewish people. These were people who were propelled by courage, who saw things that weren't in line with their hearts and acted, transforming not only the lives of people they saved, but their own lives as well. Now, due to the movie Schindler's List, most of us have heard of the heroism of Oskar Schindler. But there was also Stefania Podgorska-Burzminska. Pretty good. A 17-year-old Polish teenager who hid 13 Jews in her small apartment with her 7-year-old sister. There was Alexander Roslin, a black market dealer who kept uprooting his family to shelter 3 Jewish children in his care. There was Marianne von Binsbergen Pritchard, who shot a Dutch Nazi policeman to protect the lives of the father and his 3 children whom she was hiding. And there was a Bulgarian baker who hid 9 Jews in his oven during a Nazi rampage. Although many of these rescuers felt fear, their courage propelled them to act while their countrymen and women stood by or even participated in the atrocities against the Jewish people. Now, I believe, we'd all like to say we would have stepped in. We would have sheltered those in need, risked our lives for others. But the vast majority of people in Nazi-occupied Europe did not. What is it that ignites the courage in some people and not in others? By looking into the rescuers' past and upbringing, Ava Fogelman noticed a few things about people who cannot stand by while injustice is occurring. Now, her first insight was that most of these rescuers had been raised in a family, community, or faith tradition that celebrated diversity or taught tolerance of other people's difference. The courage they showed came from their conviction that regardless of race or gender or religion, people are equal, deserving of the same treatment, connected to one another. Fogelman's second insight was that people of courage have role models in their lives that are compassionate and loving. Their parents or teachers or siblings or a religious leader taught them right from wrong and demonstrated to them the values of living one's conviction. When faced with the opportunity to act, they would ask themselves, what would my mother do? What would my father do? And then they would act. Lastly, Fogelman asserts that these courageous men, women, and children were autonomous thinkers. They had a self-sustaining independence which was nurtured when the person was young. These rescuers sought to create justice and felt compelled to right what was wrong. Honor diversity, have great mentors, and be an independent thinker. I don't know. Sounds very Unitarian Universalist to me. But the question to ask ourselves is, are we modeling acceptance of diversity, of religion, of race, of gender, of sexual orientation, of class, of opinion? Are we a presence in the community which surrounds us, reaching out to make the world a better place, safer for the diverse people who live in it? My colleague, Barbara Wells Tenhove, writes, role models are critical. Eva Fogelman's research on rescuers of Jews showed that an astonishing 89% had a parent or adult figure who acted as an altruistic role model. One of the rescuers described her mother as a wonderful person who always had an open heart for anyone who needed it. A story Fogelman collected that is worth telling at some length. A woman told Fogelman of her mother's willingness to barter away all their valuable goods to provide supplies to political prisoners. One day she watched as her mother opened up a box that held 12 beautiful place settings of silver that had been a treasured wedding gift. I quote her directly. I was with her when she opened that box. She took out one of the spoons, and I saw her hold it, weigh it in her hand, apparently far away in thought. Would you rather keep it? I asked her, and anxiously waited for her to reply. Keep it? She repeated after a long silence. The spoon had been engraved with her initials. She looked at them, suddenly smiled as if something occurred to her. Putting the spoon down, she turned to me and took my hand and said, "You must learn to understand that only what you give, you'll have. Only what you give, you'll have." Tenhove concludes that daughter learned to value people over things. This instilled in her the courage to stand up to others who would deny human rights to those who were different. By modeling selfless love, this mother taught her daughter a profound lesson in moral courage. So I ask you, are we teaching our children that only in giving do they truly receive? Are we demonstrating the importance of independent thinking, to act when others would not, to speak out when others are silent? Are we teaching our children, our nieces, our nephews, our grandchildren, the children in this community, to question what doesn't make sense even when those in authority telling them it does? Are we teaching them to trust their hearts and that to bring things in line with their hearts could take time? You see, this work of courage is not easy. It can tire you out, as some of you I'm sure know. But it's work that lifts your soul, transforms you. Eva Fogelman also lifts up faith as one of the traits these courageous girls and boys, men and women demonstrated. I think, like Martin Luther King Jr. did, that to have courage you must have faith. Faith in yourself, faith in others, faith in what you call the holy. Dr. King had faith that God would be with him no matter what happened. He had faith in himself that he could handle anything that was set in his path. He also had tremendous faith in humanity, that humans could be persuaded to be courageous, to transform the world into a place of equality and hope for all. That was the courage of Dr. King. May it be so. Our closing hymn is the African American National Anthem, hymn number 149, Lift Every Voice and Sing.